Eli sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor, the glow of his phone screen painting his face in cold light. Around him, the city buzzed with restless noise, honking cars, distant sirens, and muffled voices. But inside his little sanctuary, silence was the only language he understood. His world was a series of scrolling feeds, instant messages, and the occasional eye roll at the endless noise from the adults around him. His mother's voice had grown softer lately, almost a whisper. "You have to grow up sometime," she'd say, her eyes heavy with worry. But Eli only shrugged and turned away, retreating deeper into his digital fortress. The outside world was too loud, too confusing. His future felt like a blurry picture he wasn't ready to face. Then, one afternoon, the mailman handed him a rough brown envelope, weathered, folded unevenly, sealed with a strip of tape that smelled faintly of pine and smoke. It was from his grandfather, a man Eli barely remembered, living far away in a wilderness no city kid ever dared to imagine. The letter was simple. No promises, no explanations. Just a challenge. "Come find yourself. If you're man enough." The words burned on the paper like an old fire still alive beneath the ashes. Eli didn't want to believe the letter held any meaning, but somewhere deep inside, a stubborn spark ignited. Was this a dare, a call, or something he'd been waiting for all along? The city's chaos suddenly felt smaller, as if the vast wilderness could swallow him whole, and maybe, just maybe, spit him back out different. That night, Eli packed a single bag. No fancy gadgets, no excuses. Just boots, a jacket, and the letter folded in his pocket like a secret talisman. His mother watched in silence, tears caught behind her lashes. She didn't say goodbye, he didn't look back. The plane ride north was surreal. Below the clouds, the grid of streets vanished, replaced by endless forests and jagged mountains. The city's hum faded into a distant memory, replaced by a silence so deep it was almost loud. Eli stared out the window, feeling like he was crossing into another world, one where the rules were raw, simple, and brutal. Landing in the remote airstrip, Eli's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and excitement. The cold bit at his cheeks, the wind whispered strange promises, and he felt the weight of every step he took toward the unknown. This wasn't just a trip, it was a reckoning. Jack stood waiting on the weathered wooden porch of his cabin, a giant carved from the same wood and stone as the land around him. His eyes were sharp, gray as storm clouds, carrying the quiet weight of decades spent in the wilderness. He barely glanced at Eli, but the silence between them was heavier than any welcome. The cabin smelled of wood smoke, pine, and something older, like history folded into every crack and creak. There was no TV, no internet, no distractions. Just the raw world outside, and the rules Jack had lived by since the day he'd first stepped into the wild. Jack's voice was gravelly, every word deliberate. "Don't touch my tools." The sentence hung in the frosty air like a warning. Eli understood immediately. This was a place where survival wasn't a game. It was a code written in blood and cold mornings. "Don't feed what you can't kill." The words echoed in Eli's mind. The animals here were not pets, nor trophies. They were life, death, and everything in between. To feed them without respect was to invite disaster. And then the final rule: never wander off. A command, not a suggestion. The forest was beautiful, but it was also merciless. The wrong step could mean disappearing into shadows no one would find you from. Eli's nights were spent under a sky crowded with stars he'd never seen before. The silence pressed in on him, a constant reminder of how small he was in this vast place. The city's noise was a distant memory, replaced by the whisper of wind through needles, the crackle of frozen branches. The days were harder. His hands, soft and untested, learned to chop wood. His lungs, unused to cold air, burned with every breath. Jack watched without pity, pushing Eli to the edge of his patience and strength. "You either learn," he said, "or you don't survive." Slowly, Eli felt the wild seep into his bones, filling the spaces where doubt had lived. The wilderness demanded everything: respect, courage, patience, and offered nothing in return but a chance to be something real. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the trees with gold, Eli heard a desperate cry. It wasn't human, but sharp and urgent, like a flame flickering in the cold. He followed the sound through tangled brush, every step cautious, heart racing. There, caught in cruel metal teeth, was a young bobcat. Her fur was matted with blood, eyes wild but trusting. The snare had cut deep, a cruel reminder of man's careless touch on this fragile world. Eli knelt beside her, trembling hands working to loosen the trap. He knew he should leave. The forest had rules after all. Humans and wild things were not meant to be friends. But something in her gaze stopped him, a flicker of defiance, a silent plea for mercy. He carried her back to the cabin, ignoring Jack's scowl and silent disapproval. He named her Ember for the fierce spark she carried despite her wounds. Night after night, Eli tended to her, his own wounds hidden beneath the skin of a city boy learning to survive. Ember became his secret, a symbol of hope and rebellion against the cold rules he'd been given. She was wild, fierce, and unpredictable, just like him. In her eyes, Eli saw a reflection of his own struggle to find light in the darkness. Their bond grew quietly, unspoken but unbreakable. When Jack coughed by the fire, worn down by years and sickness, Eli found strength in the small warmth of Ember's presence. The wilderness was no longer just a place of fear. It was a place where wounds could heal and flames could burn bright again. But the forest was always watching. Every step, every breath carried a risk. And Eli was learning that survival was not just about strength. It was about heart. Jack's eyes held stories Eli couldn't yet understand. Tales woven from winters harsher than any the boy had imagined, and summers soaked in sweat and survival. One evening, beside the crackling fire, Jack's voice broke the silence, low and deliberate. The wild speaks in whispers, if you learn to listen. He reached into his worn leather satchel and pulled out an old, frayed journal. The pages were yellowed, etched with maps, symbols, and notes in a handwriting that trembled like the flicker of flame. "This is my life," Jack said, "written down for the day I'd pass it on. You're that day, whether you like it or not." Eli traced the lines on the paper, fingers trembling with awe. These weren't just rules or survival tips. They were pieces of a life carved from the earth, lessons wrapped in patience and pain. Each word was a seed, planted in the soil of his own uncertainty. Jack spoke of the land's hidden dangers, how the ice could shift without warning, how the wind carried both promise and threat, how silence could be a scream waiting to be heard. The old man's voice softened, almost reverent. You have to learn to respect what you can't control. Night after night, Jack taught Eli to read the signs, the broken twig, the faintest scent, the way shadows lengthen before danger. The forest never forgets, he said. It remembers every step you take, every mistake, every moment of courage. Eli's fingers grew calloused, turning the pages of the journal, his mind stretching to grasp the wild's language. It wasn't just about staying alive, it was about understanding the heartbeat beneath the trees, the ancient rhythm that had shaped every creature, every breath of wind. In Jack's stories, the wilderness was both guardian and judge, a harsh teacher with no mercy but endless wisdom. The old man's secrets were keys, unlocking doors to a world Eli had only glimpsed in dreams and nightmares. And beneath it all, a quiet hope stirred. That maybe, through these stories, Eli could find not just survival, but a way back to himself. The sky darkened early, the sun swallowed by thick clouds that churned with restless winds. The forest seemed to hold its breath as twilight slipped into night. Eli sat by the fire, Ember curled in his lap. The warmth of her small body, a fragile comfort against the growing cold. Jack was restless, pacing outside the cabin with a glint of something Eli hadn't seen before. A mixture of worry and fierce determination. "Tonight," Jack muttered, "the forest tests us all." The words hung in the air like a warning. As the shadows deepened, strange noises whispered from the woods. Snaps of twigs, distant howls, the low growl of something unseen. Eli's heart pounded. The wild was alive, watching, waiting for a moment of weakness. Suddenly, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it a storm fierce and unforgiving. The cabin shuddered beneath the onslaught, rain lashing the windows like 1,000 sharp nails. The fire flickered, threatening to die, but Eli fought to keep it alive, a small beacon against the darkness. Then came the cries, sharp, urgent, desperate. Not embers this time, but a warning carried on the wind. Jack grabbed his rifle, eyes blazing, and shouted, "Get ready!" The night wasn't just a test of survival. It was a reckoning. Through the storm, shapes moved, shadowy figures pressing closer, a dance of predator and prey. Eli's pulse thundered in his ears as he gripped the old man's words, remembering every lesson, every whispered secret of the wild. The night stretched long and cruel, a battle not just against the elements, but against fear itself. And in the eye of the storm, Eli found something unexpected: strength, clarity, and a fierce spark that refused to be snuffed out. When dawn finally broke, pale and fragile, the forest was silent once more. But Eli was no longer the boy who had arrived. The night had marked him, forged him anew in fire and shadow. Morning light filtered through frost-coated branches, casting long, trembling shadows across the snow. Eli stood at the edge of the clearing, eyes tracing the delicate footprints left behind by creatures both fierce and fleeting. The forest was alive with lessons, whispered in the rustle of leaves and the crackle of ice. Jack's voice came soft but firm. The wild doesn't give its secrets easily. You take what it offers and you leave the rest. The old man's gaze held the weight of years spent learning this truth, one hard-earned step at a time. Eli's hands trembled as he gathered kindling, feeling the fragile balance between respect and necessity. Each snapped twig was a question answered, each flicker of flame a promise kept. Survival was no longer just about endurance. It was about harmony with a world far older than himself. He watched Ember move through the trees, graceful, cautious, free. She was a living lesson, wild and untamed, yet bound to him by threads of trust and hope. In her eyes, Eli saw the wild's true face, beautiful, brutal, and unforgiving. Jack taught him how to track the snow's silent stories, the paths animals carved, the places they hid, the signs of danger lurking beneath beauty. To live here, Jack said, you have to become part of the story, not just a visitor. The days passed in a rhythm shaped by the sun and stars, by hunger and hope, by moments of triumph and deep, aching solitude. Eli learned the language of the wind, the song of the trees, the silence of snow falling on frozen ground. Every lesson was a step away from the boy who had arrived, and towards something new, something fierce and fragile, like a flame that refuses to die even in the coldest night. In the wild's lesson, Eli found more than survival. He found a mirror for his own heart, a place where courage and vulnerability danced beneath the endless sky. The sun dipped low, bleeding gold through the canopy, as if the sky itself was setting fire to the forest. The air tightened around Eli, thick with expectation, as though the land held its breath for what was to come. This was the moment Jack had prepared him for, the crucible where boy became something more. Every sense sharpened, every nerve alive with anticipation. The wild had one last lesson to teach, fierce and unyielding. It was a test not just of strength or skill, but of spirit, the invisible thread that ties a soul to the earth and sky. Eli's heart pounded a wild rhythm as shadows lengthened, transforming the woods into a world of mystery and menace. He could feel unseen eyes watching, weighing, waiting. There was no turning back, only forward, into the heart of the challenge. The ground beneath him shifted subtly, a tremor of movement that whispered danger. Then, from the shadows, a presence emerged, silent, powerful, a force both feared and revered. It was the wild itself, embodied in a shape that tested Eli's courage to its core. Jack's voice came to him like a ghost, steady and sure. Face it with honor. The wild respects those who stand their ground. Eli squared his shoulders, eyes blazing with newfound fire, ready to meet what must come. The battle was not loud or brutal, but a dance of wills, patience, respect, and fierce determination colliding beneath the twilight sky. Each breath was a prayer, each heartbeat a drum of defiance against fear. When the final test ended, the silence that followed was deep and sacred. Eli stood transformed, marked by the wild's grace and strength. He was no longer just a boy lost in the forest. He was a part of its endless story. And as the stars blinked awake overhead, Eli knew this was only the beginning of a journey that would shape the rest of his life. The first light of dawn spilled soft and golden through the trees, washing the forest in hues of hope. Eli's footsteps were lighter now, each one a testament to lessons learned and fears conquered. The wild had changed him, wound him and healed him in equal measure, and now the path home called. Jack's cabin emerged from the morning mist like a promise kept, familiar and waiting. The boy who returned was no longer the same lost soul who had stumbled into the wilderness weeks before. He carried the wild strength within him, a quiet fire that burned steady and bright. Ember trotted ahead, tail flicking like a banner of survival and trust. Together, they crossed frozen streams and climbed familiar hills, the forest greeting them not as strangers, but as kin. Each step was a thread, weaving Eli back into a world he once thought left behind. The journey home was not just a physical crossing, but a return to himself, an embrace of the wild spirit that now thrummed beneath his skin. Jack met him at the door, eyes shining with pride and something deeper, a shared understanding forged in the fires of survival. Eli stepped inside, the warmth of the cabin wrapping around him like a second skin. The wilds, lessons would remain etched in his heart, but now they lived alongside the comfort of home. He was a bridge between two worlds, one of untamed wilderness, the other of quiet, enduring humanity. As the sun rose higher, painting the sky with promise, Eli knew the forest would always call him back. But for now, he was home, whole, healed, and ready to face whatever lay ahead. In the stillness of that morning, the boy and the wild became one story, forever entwined beneath the endless sky.